Well, welcome back. This is our fourth session, and what we're talking about here is the pure being of pure non-being. Boy, that sounds like a strange topic, the pure being of pure non-being. But it's only a strange topic because we don't generally talk about nothing in the way that we need to talk about it in Western culture. And I would not have come to know nothing the way that I know nothing. And I did write a book about nothing. I'll just quickly uh, put the book on the screen here. This is my book, Nothing, a Sober Discussion of Being and Non-Being. I just put my hand on the screen here and you can say, Nothing, a Sober Discussion of Being and Non-Being. And there it is. I don't want to have that sitting in my background for the whole thing, so I'm going to get rid of but that anyway, it turns out it's about 338 pages. Uh, I said earlier 383 or something, but it's about 330 pages, something like that. The Bill Wilson, when it says in page 13 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, said, "At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time for treatment, saying wise, for I showed signs of delirium and tremors, and there offered myself to God as I then understood him, to do with it as he would. And for the first time, I admitted that of myself, I was nothing." Well, I had never really seen that before. And then later on in the 12 and 12, he says, "Many of us who thought of ourselves religious awoke to the limitations of this attitude, refusing to place God first. We had deprived ourselves of his help. In other words, of myself, I am nothing. The Father doeth the works, began to carry bright promise and meaning." Well, that's kind of maybe a misquote from the New Testament. Of myself, I can do nothing. But it turns out that he was still not in the wrong totally, because Frank Buckman says this listening to God is not the experience of a few minutes. It's the most sane, normal, healthful thing a person can do. You begin to realize your own nothingness. Um, it turns out that people like St. John of the Cross had said, I've been freed from this. No, that's here's St. John of the Cross. To reach satisfaction in all desires, possession of nothing, to come to possess all, desire the possession of nothing, to arrive at being all, desire to be nothing, to come to possess all, desire to possess nothing, to arrive at being all, desire to be nothing. I misread that. Um, that's in my book, Nothing, on page 131. T.S. Eliot said, "I've been freed from the self that pretends to be someone and becoming no one. I begin to live. It's worthwhile dying to find out what life is." And in Galatians 6:3, we see Paul's quoting, "If anyone thinks himself to be something when he's nothing, he deceives himself." Well, this is really strange that we don't, most people think that we're something, but apparently throughout the ages, there have been people who understand that we really are nothing. And that the problem is, and I would not have known this had not a dear friend told me that I needed to read a book called Reality by a guy named Peter Kingsley. And Reality is a book that Peter Kingsley's done about a poem written by the philosopher Parmenides. And Parmenides was not actually a philosopher, but he's considered a philosopher because he was the guy, one of the thinkers that preceded Socrates and Plato. There was two big ones, Parmenides and Heraclitus. And Parmenides said that everything is one and nothing ever changes. It's always stays one and stays the same and never changes. Heraclitus says there is no unity. Everything is a multitude of different parts, and everything's constantly changing. Way up is down. You can never step in the same river, so it's never the same river. You're never the same person. So changes. So you have constant change, and you have unity, no change. Plato would take that unity and diversity and turn it into his universe. So we live in this duality that was made up by Plato, unity and diversity universe. The problem was that Parmenides was mistaken. He had gone down into Plato got tricked by Parmenides' poem. he had gone down to the underworld and ran into, well, he being a high priest of Apollo, it was known that these guys would uh, take a ergot of wheat and drink this ergot of wheat, which had the properties of LSD, and go into a trance state, like trip, and go into a trance state. And he went into the underworld and ran into the goddess of the underworld, Persephone. And she says there's three paths. There's the path of being, there's a path of non-being, the path of constant change, the path of think of the path of becoming. But she says you cannot, you can travel the first path, you cannot travel the second path because the second path does not exist. In other words, there is only being and becoming, there is no non-being. Well, it turns out Plato adopts this idea of just this universe of being and non-being. Well, it turns out um, that's caused us a huge problem. That's where we are right now. And I need to stop for a second, kind of reconnoiter here because I don't want to get too deep into this until I'll kind of hang on. I'm just going to take a little break here. Um, well, anyway, so it, what does it mean to be? I mean, that's been a big question ever since the time of Plato. Nobody ever even dug into this question of about being until a guy named Heidegger, Martin Heidegger, in the 20th century. He realized that nobody had really dug into what it means to be since the ancient time, and so he wrote a book called Being in Time, and it's a very complicated book. It's not easy to read, and I tried reading it. I got a few things out of it, but did get something out of some of the things he wrote about the same time when he was dealing with this issue of nothing. And he and both he and the preceding philosopher before him, Hegel, in the 19th century, both concluded that pure being and pure non-being are the same. Now, you wonder, how can you explain that? How is it that pure being and pure non-being are the same? Well, it you know I want to try to make this as simple as possible. Um, so so the problem we have in our Western culture is we for the last 2,500 years we've been living the question: did the universe start from something? Was it always something here, or did it start from nothing? And that's what the Bible had said. When the Bible came along, when Christianity came along, Christianity said that the universe had started from nothing. I don't know, 7,000 years ago or whatever. Um, the Greek philosophers, the natural philosophers said that, and Plato was one who said that the universe had started from four elements that the designer, I forgot what he called it, he didn't call it the creator, but the person that was considered the creative agent in the world had taken the four elements of earth, wind, water, and fire and fashioned the universe out of these four elements. Well, Christianity came along and said, no, 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 the universe has started from by the word of God saying, let there be light, and light came forth. Well, when Christianity took over the ancient world, I mean, Greek philosophy kind of went out the door to a certain extent, but the church, a lot of the early church fathers had been philosophers. I mean, Augustine himself had been a student of Plotinus, a, a Platonic philosopher, and most of the ancient Greek Christian fathers had been very much involved in Greek philosophy, and so they kind of dragged some of those Greek philosophical ideas into the Christian church. And I'll just say in passing, because we'll come to this later, the whole idea of the Western idea of a self, this disembodied eye of the soul that's basically the person who does the thinking and makes the choices and all that. That's really a great concept. That it's not a biblical idea, and we'll get into that a little bit later because what we're dealing with now is of course nothing. Okay, so um, okay, okay, so the problem of nothing would not have been a problem, or as as the Western world became more and more kind of science began to reemerge and Greek philosophy began to reemerge in the Western culture, and bit by bit, scientific discoveries were made, and scientists discovered that the Earth was not the center of the universe, that maybe the sun was the center of the universe, and they discovered that, goodness gracious, there's this immense universe way beyond the sun and the moon and the stars, and they began to really question this idea of a universe that started from nothing. They pretty much started trying to figure out where did this universe come from. Um, and of course, going way back to Democritus, the Greeks had said that there was an infinite multiverse. There's an infinity of universes, and one universe fins off another universe. And science began to develop that idea. But unfortunately for science, in the late 1960s, scientists discovered what's on the cover of my book, that big um, green sphere. That's the universe, and this out here is the nothing out of which the universe emerged. In other words, they got this radio telescopic vision of the universe when it was only 300 and I think 365 million years old, just just in its infancy. Oh, something 365 million, 300, 360, 380. I don't know. I've got to back to get the numbers in my head again. Um, but when it was just in its infancy, okay, it and it had obviously had started from nothing. Um, but science doesn't like the nothing. It can't deal with the nothing. It wants to dismiss the nothing with a lordly wave of a hand. It cannot deal with the idea of nothing. Um, but so at the same time, we have these philosophers begin to realize that maybe our whole understanding of being was wrong. And of course, I guess I just need to switch gears a little bit here and say that creating our world is very much grounded on the first three verses. It, in the first chapter of 1 Corinthians, verses 27 and 28, um, God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, the weak things of the world to confound the powerful, and things that are not to bring the nothing to things that are. So what we are is we are nothing, and we are bringing the nothing to things that are. In other words, and I kind of jumped the gun, and you probably could say, well, how did he get there? um, well, everybody who embraces the idea of being nothing. Oh goodness, I'm having a light out here. I think I've got lightning outside. Um, but I'm going to stop that right now. I'm just going to put an end to this and come back and redo this later.